First Alert breaking the silence and talking about eating disorders. A recent influx of people struggling has medical experts worried, but there are ways to help. Aisha's at the First Alert Safety Desk. And what causes eating disorders?
Well, Emerson, it depends on the person, but there are certainly red flags. We spoke with Jessica Herman, a registered dietitian with ThedaCare. She says social isolation is one way eating disorders can develop or relapse. So during the pandemic and just following it, doctors saw a surge in people dealing with eating disorders, not to mention the recent weight loss medication craze and social media trends. Young people especially can be impressionable as they start to understand their bodies and eating habits. The National Eating Disorders Association says about 9% of the population in the U.S. will have an eating disorder in their lifetime. That's about 30 million Americans. But experts say eating disorders are not widely talked about. And as we approach Eating Disorders Awareness Week next week, advocates, they really want to change that and really talk about it. Other than social isolation, you may notice someone complain of constant stomach aches, nausea, or other GI symptoms. Maybe they also start to have really rigid rules about their healthy diet. Maybe they're calorie counting or not eating with family and friends. Experts say if you're worried, take that first step and express some concern. It's best to not use the words eating disorder. Instead, talk about the behaviors you're worried about.
And really just giving them your full undivided attention, doing so in a confidential space, and allowing them time to, express what's going on and not being afraid of the response that they might really be struggling severely.
If you or someone is struggling with an eating disorder, Herman says the next step is finding resources to help, whether that's a doctor, a counselor, employee assistance program. But this morning, the message is to know it is okay to tell someone you're struggling. Talking about it is a great first step. Steve.
Thank you.